Hi there, my name is Trish Lynch from IOHR in London. Thank you for being with us for another episode of our Human Rights TV. Iran has been at the centre of a number of human rights violations in recent years. The unjust detention of human rights defenders and journalists such as Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has definitely hit the international news headlines. But in the background of these detentions, everyday Iranians are facing increased economic difficulties because of the US's reimposed sanctions. Joining us today is Saeed Dehghan, a Guardian journalist and an expert on Iran who was named 2010 Journalist of the Year at the Foreign Press Association Awards. Saeed, good to have you with us today. Thank you very much for coming.
My pleasure.
To share with us your expertise on Iran. Now, we read a lot about the political implications of the reimposed sanctions on Iran, but today at IOHR, we'd like to concentrate on the everyday person on the street. How have these sanctions impacted on them?
I mean, sanctions, blanket sanctions in particular, hurt ordinary people. I mean, during the previous round of sanctions, we saw the impact of these sanctions on the import of life-saving medicines, for example. Like people with cancer could not get hold of the life-saving medicines, and other people who are desperate to get it. I mean, the price of medicine will go up. The other problem is that even those medicines that are produced domestically in Iran, the ingredients of those substances come from abroad, and companies have difficulties get hold of those substances, and it brings a shortage. It brings the prices go up. So although sanctions are not directly affecting medicine imports, but indirectly they are affecting sanctions. And I mean, an Iranian student in Tehran University or somewhere else who wants to subscribe to an international journal cannot do that because there is no banking relations between Iran and outside. So I mean, I think sanctions, I mean, especially blanket sanctions as they are, because I mean, these sanctions are about no banking ties with any Iranian bank, no exceptions, anything, affect ordinary Iranians at large, and we've seen it, especially in Iran, where the middle class has a huge power, and these sanctions are affecting them mostly.
The currency has lost more than half of its value against the US dollar on the unofficial market this year. We know that the price of foodstuffs such as everyday fruit and vegetable has gone up by 50% since the start of 2018. Tell me about other everyday commodities.
I mean, the price of dollar in Iran is very important, mainly because of the psychological pressure. I mean, Iran has a $17 million dollar surplus. It's not in short of any dollar. The problem it has problem getting all these dollar inside Iran in the form of cash. So the people in the streets, if you are going to go abroad, if you are traveling abroad to see your family or studying, you want to change your currency to dollar, then there's no currency to get hold of. And then the price has gone up, as you said. I mean, 60%. It's lost 60% of its value since April, since the U.S. President Donald Trump indicated that he was pulling the U.S. unilaterally out of the agreement, and that has affected all aspects of Iranian life. Mainly, the psychological effect has been huge. A lot of people are worried about the future. What's going to? There's been a rush to change our currency to dollars and get hold of gold. In Iran, traditionally, the price of dollar and the price of gold has served as a barometer of Iranians' confidence in the handling of the government. And because both of them have gone up hugely, I mean, that has affected the Iranians in general and their confidence in the handling by the Iranian government of the economic situation. And because of that, everything, I mean, even items that are not imported, I mean, you would think that items that are imported are going to be affected more because you would need to access dollar to bring them to Iran. But even items that are not affected by the imports or dollar directly have had their prices gone up. And as I said, in all aspects of Iranian life, from the price of yogurt, the price of things like butter, to the price of cars, and renting a place in your city has hugely gone up. I mean, when I talk to Iranians, I talk to Iranians every day. The level of hopelessness that exists in Iran is quite unprecedented. Somebody was telling me that even its bigger than the hopelessness that people had during the Iran-Iraq war in 1980s. Because in the war times, people thought there's going to be an end to it. The war is going to end. But now they think, when is this going to end? And then what is the strategy?
And this is just the beginning of these reimposed sanctions, and who knows where that will end, I suppose.
Yeah, the important thing is that the first round of sanctions that came into effect earlier this month in August was not the hardest. I mean, the new round of sanctions in November is going to be an embargo on the imports of Iranian oil, and the banking restrictions are going to have a bigger toll. It's going to be harsher, and I think that's affecting a lot of these calculations inside Iran in terms of how the economy strong enough to withstand it. I think that Iranian economy is not on the verge of collapse because Iran has been under sanctions for 4 decades. Iran has found ways to circumvent sanctions. And also you have to remember this round of sanctions are mainly imposed by the US, and the Europeans are opposing the US stance on sanctions. But this time around, there's a lot of psychological pressure, whereas previously, for example, 8 years ago, you had some unity inside Iran. The political unity doesn't exist inside Iran now. And also there's been a string of other elements such as environmental challenges. Iran is facing its worst drought in modern history, and also weeks of protests about environmental issues as well as unpaid wages is putting an unprecedented pressure on the Iranian government. So it's a mixture of sanctions also coming at this critical time in Iran that is creating a huge problem.
Let's talk about the protests now in Tehran, Shiraz and Qom in early August. Do you think that they're purely for economic reasons? I know you mentioned all the other reasons, but are they purely as revolt against these economic sanctions?
I mean, earlier this year in January, actually last December and then continued in January, we had a wave of protest in Iran that started first in Mashhad in eastern Iran and then spread very quickly in a matter of days to different parts of Iran in a way that nothing like that people had seen since the revolution. Some of it were like small and sporadic protests, but I mean the geographical nature of it was quite unprecedented and took a lot of people, including myself, covering it for 10 years by surprise. And the other element that was very interesting and that made it very unexpected for people was that it was working class protesting and not the middle class. So back in 2009 when I was in Tehran,
isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, back in 2009 when I was in Tehran, I was covering the post-election protest. That was mainly the middle class going out in the street and asking, where is my vote? And this time it was people going out and asking about the economic situation, about more fundamental things such as the price of food, the price of staple foods, those sort of things. So I think a lot of people were surprised because they didn't know the impact of the economic hardship on the working class, and that was why it took a lot of people by surprise. And that's why a lot of slogans were quite harsher than what we saw back in 2009.
What will the Revolutionary Guard do to people who are actively taking to the streets? Because this is something that they actively try to discourage, isn't it?
I mean, under the Iranian constitution, if you are doing a peaceful protest, you don't need any permission. But the authorities in Iran, of course, are not abiding fully by the Iranian constitution. The Iranian constitution bans censorship, but Iran is one of the worst places to be a journalist. A record number of journalists are behind Iranian bars. In terms of protest, the authorities have quelled the protest. They've used violence. They've wielded batons. They used tear gas. But when I compare it to back in 2009, they seem to have been less harsher this time, probably because they've so far maintained to contain it. If the protests are to continue, then we would have to wait and see if the Revolutionary Guards will use harsher tactics to crack down. There's a belief that to an extent the Revolutionary Guards did not involve directly in the cracking down so far in this new round of sanctions compared to 2009, mainly because the Iranian police was able to contain it. I mean, a lot of people have been arrested. I mean, a number of students have been arrested. They've been given lengthy prison terms, especially students of Tehran University. There was one student, Paris Arafi'i, who was emerged this week as given 7 years in jail just for peaceful protest. So the state, of course, is trying to send these signals that if you participate, we're going to retaliate by very harsh sentences. So far, it's not stopped people from going out. You see sporadic protests. But it has not been so challenging that Iranians would change their tactics yet.
People are unhappy, not just because of the economic sanctions, but because of unemployment and corruption too, aren't they?
People in Iran are happy with a repressive state at home, but also a West that is out of touch with the realities on the ground. I mean, you are, if you're an Iranian inside Iran, you're of course fed up with the repression that exists in everyday life. I mean, not able to express yourself freely, but also you're fed up with the West, the US in particular, I mean, violating this nuclear agreement while Iran has been abiding by it, as verified by the International Atomic Energy Agency 11 times. So it's a very tricky situation where you have people on the ground being squeezed both by a repressive state, but also by a United States that is bent on regime change and out of touch with realities on the ground.
Now, you mentioned this earlier, but Washington has told other countries that they must halt all imports of Iranian oil from November the 4th or face US financial measures. Now, oil exports could fall by as much as 2/3 by the end of the year. What will this loss of income do to the everyday person on the street? And of course, what will it do to gasoline prices?
I mean, the oil revenues account for a huge amount of Iranian income. And when we're talking about Iranian income, we're talking about Iranian people. It's not just about the Revolutionary Guards. In fact, the harsher sanctions are, it strengthens hardliners in Iran, and the Revolutionary Guards included, in terms of how they handle the Iranian state and the economy. We've seen that before, when sanctions were, huge under Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. The Revolutionary Guards and the hardline faction of the Iranian state had a bigger role in handling everyday politics in Iran. And when Hassan Rouhani, the president, first was elected back in 2013, there was an opening up. A number of prisoners were released. Some of them have now been put back, of course. Some of it is because he's been sidelined, because his biggest achievement was this nuclear agreement in 2015, which now Donald Trump has vowed to put an end to it. So he's been undermined in Iran, not because he's not delivering on his promises. Part of it is because the US is violating these sanctions and putting him in a very difficult situation at home vis-a-vis the hardliners.
Do you think that these reimposed sanctions by the US could in any way repair relations between Iran and the US? Or is it, like many people believe, just too late? We're at the point of no return.
Well, the US president has indicated that he's open to talks with Iran, but that has been contradicted by his national security advisor and his Secretary of State. So it's difficult to find out if he's genuine or not.
Okay.
But what history has told us is if you talk with if you want to talk being bullish towards Iran, you'll not be able to get any respect from Iran. And Iranians have always said it, that if you're acting with bully, and what the US is now doing is basically bullying Iran, then it's difficult to get the Iranians on the table. Of course, there are calls in Iran from both the reformists and the hardliners that you're dealing with Trump. It's not a normal president, and you have to explore all your options for this well-being and the interest of the larger population, even if it includes sitting down with him and talking to him.
Saeed Dehghan, we thank you for your time today on IOHR. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of our Human Rights TV. Don't forget, you can keep right up to date on our website and our social media feed. Join us again next time. Goodbye.